this video, we'll set up Vuex and all of its actions, mutations, getters, and its default state. Vuex is a library for creating what's called a store. And you can think of a store as simply an ephemeral database for your application. And I say ephemeral because a refresh causes the whole thing to go away usually. Also, the store acts similarly to a database in that all of your interactions with it must be explicit. To get data from a database, you query it. To store items in a database, you must explicitly commit those changes. Nothing gets in and out of the database without an explicit step, and we'll interact with our store in a similar manner. So let's start by creating a brand new branch for this work we're about to do. So we're actually on the master branch, and I've gone ahead and done a git pull. And you can see that I've pulled in the latest changes that we just did. And now I'm going to create a brand new branch by running the git checkout-b command with the name of the new branch. So I'm going to call this setup Vuex. Now let's create all of the files that will comprise our store. And I will again invoke the touch command. I'm going to create an actions file, and it looks like I haven't created my Vuex directory quite yet. So I'm going to go ahead and do a make dir for that directory first. Then I will invoke the touch command again. I'm going to create actions. I'm going to create mutations. I'm going to also create getters. And then finally, I'm going to create our main store file. Vuex has a concept of mutations, actions, and getters. And these three concepts interact with each other like so. Components dispatch actions, actions commit mutations, mutations alter the store, and getters allow you to expose your store to, for example, your templates. So let's go ahead and create our store with a single simple getter. I'm going to open up one of the newly created files inside of source Vuex store.js. And here I'm going to configure my new store. First, I will import Vue. And then I will import the Vuex library. And this import statement will fail because I haven't yet installed Vuex, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, there we go. And you can see that I installed it by running npm install --save Vuex at next. And the at next identifier tells npm that please install version 2, which will match up with my Vue version. Okay, so now that's done, this import statement should work, and we can move on. So we need to then configure Vue to use Vuex, and this sets up a bunch of other stuff under the hood that make working with components compatible with Vuex. And now I'm going to actually create the store. And I can define a default state here. And right now it's just going to be an empty object. So let's actually go ahead and create a state. And I found out where one of the coordinates of on the map was, and that was of Santa Monica. So I'm going to create a constant for that coordinate that we will use right now, and we'll also use it later on. And Santa Monica position, in order to get to Santa Monica, you need to position the map with a negative 116 pixels to the left and a top of negative 3013 pixels. So those are the coordinates for our map of Santa Monica. So now let's go ahead and initialize the default state. We'll give it our map name. And we'll also give it our coordinates. And we will have the default coordinates be Santa Monica. And now in order to set the state on our store, we just do that like so. And as I stated earlier, we're using ES6 syntax here, so this second state declaration is not necessary. Now let's configure our main.js file, which is the file that bootstraps our application to use Vuex. So I'm going to import the store that we just created. And then I will simply configure the application to use the new store. So it's really that simple. And I'm going to pop back over to the application and I will check out the dev tools. And I have the what are called the Vue dev tools installed, and we can pop over to there and then we can click on Vuex. And we can see that the base state is actually instantiated with the state that we've configured in our application. So we have the coordinates for Santa Monica and we have the map name. And you can see that we didn't actually pan to Santa Monica here. That's because we haven't wired up our component to honor these coordinates. So let's go ahead and do that now. In order to expose the different elements of our store or our state, we need to create what are called getters. And we created the file earlier, but we didn't actually configure any getters. So let's go ahead and do that now. I want to expose two getters here. I want to expose the map name and I also want to expose the coordinates. So let's go ahead and get started with the map name. And I'm going to create a simple function that takes the state as the first argument and then just reads off the state and returns one of the properties. So there's how you create a simple getter, and this getter is called map name. Now let's create one similarly for the coordinates. So there you go, two getters, one for the map name, one for the coordinates. And now we want to use, configure our store to actually use these coordinates. So we'll pop back over to the store and we are going to import all of these getters, import star as getters from our getters file. And now we're going to pass those getters to our store. Okay, so now we want our component to use these getters to read the coordinates properties and the map name properties. So let's head on over to our Dragger component and import the store and also import some other libraries from Vuex. Import store from And then we also want to import a library that Vuex provides called map getters. And now let's go ahead and use map getters. You might remember in Vue 1.0 that we were required to put all of our actions and getters under a separate Vuex property on our component, and that's no longer needed. In Vue 2.0, Vuex exports a map getters function which will convert our getters to simple computer properties that we can use throughout our templates. So let's go ahead and use one of these new getters that we've exposed. We'll just bind it as a data property on our image. So let's try to use the map name property. We'll save it and we'll head back over to our browser. And you can see that we have a data map name equals Los Angeles. And in a similar manner, let's bind our coordinates as well. Okay, so we're going to head back over to the browser and we will once again inspect our element, and we see our map name and we see our coordinates. But our coordinates do not update, and that's because when we move the object around, we do not in fact update our coordinates. You can see that no state changes have been registered here in the Vuex Vue DevTools with the Vuex tab enabled. So let's go ahead and wire that up now. Next, let's have our dragger component honor our default Santa Monica coordinates. So we can do that by simply setting the top and left properties using the CSS function on our map image. So we can simply pass this store.state.coordinates, and those will come through in the form of this. For example. And if we head over to our browser, we can see that Santa Monica, after a refresh, is indeed being honored. We go directly to Santa Monica Pier. So that's great. Next, we're going to configure our dragger component to update the store whenever we drag the map around. And right now that doesn't work. But we can do that through a simple function that PEP provides us called REST. And this REST function is called whenever the object has come to rest completely. So you can see it after you let it go, it moves, and then it finally comes to rest. And that's when that function is called. And let me go ahead and illustrate that right now with a simple console log. So you can see that once the object has settled down, REST is called, and this is when we're going to update the store. So we're going to create a simple function called REST. And the rest function is past the actual event, and it's also past our pep object, which has a bunch of different properties on it that we can use for different purposes. And whenever our rest function is called, we want to, like I said earlier, dispatch an action. So we can dispatch an action manually by calling store.dispatch. Then we'll give it the name of the action to dispatch, and in this case we want to dispatch an action called update coordinates. And we're going to give that action all of the stuff it needs to modify the state, or actually pass along data to a mutation. So we'll just give it the pep object for now, and we'll see why here in a moment. So now we will configure pep to use that new function. We can pop back over to the browser, and we will see that that should indeed get called. And you see that Vuex is actually throwing an error at us, and it says unknown action type update coordinates. And that's because we haven't actually configured our store to know about that action. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll open up actions.js, and we'll create our first action. And actions are passed the store, and they're also passed the payload. And in this case, if you remember, our payload was this object with pep as the single property. So you have the store, and then you have the payload, then you have the body of your function. And we don't actually need the whole store. We only need a single property of that store, which is called the commit function. So instead of taking the whole store, I'm going to destructure that store property, and I'm going to just use the commit function. And that's all we're going to need. So at the end of this function, we want to be able to commit a mutation. And we are going to commit a mutation called coordinate change. And it's customary to write your mutations in all caps. And I want to provide this mutation with solely the data it needs to mutate the state. And it only needs top and left. So let's go ahead and calculate those top and left values. First, we'll grab our pep object off the payload. Next, we'll calculate the top value. And one of the objects that we have on the pep object is the actual element. So we can read the top off of the jQuery element. And whenever pep moves an object around, it modifies it using position absolute and the top and left properties, but it also does some CSS transforms to get that nice easing function. So we'll want to add the top plus the delta that it's changed, and we can grab that delta through the CSS Y property. And then next we'll grab the left value, and we can grab that in a similar manner to how we grabbed the top value. So now we have a action which will calculate the top and left of our map and mutate the state, or commit a mutation, I should say. Now let's go ahead and try that. Okay, so next we need to wire up our mutation. And we can set up the mutation in a similar manner to setting up the action. So let's pop over to our mutations file. So every mutation is passed the state as well as the message that was sent along with the mutation. So this is the state as it currently stands, and these are values that you have at your disposal that you can use to perform your mutation. So I want to modify the coordinates, and since the coordinates have the same makeup as our message, we will just set our coordinates to our message. And there we go. So if we head back over to the browser, we can see that Vuex is still complaining that we don't have the update coordinates action, and that's because we haven't actually configured our store to have that update coordinates action. I mean, we've defined it in this file, our actions in this file, and we've also defined our mutations in this file, but we haven't actually set that up on our store quite yet. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So we'll import the mutations first. And then we'll import the action second. And we will pass those along to our store now. And it turns out I've actually mixed up my syntax. This should look like this: import mutations from mutations. And this should look like import star as actions from actions. And if we head over here to the Vue Dev Tools and look at the Vuex tab, we should be able to see the mutations that we're performing on the map or on our store, which you can. One thing you'll notice is that whenever we refresh our map here, that you can see the actual image jump as it starts from the top left and then it jumps down to our initial coordinates in Santa Monica. And I think that's a little bit of a funky user experience. And with just a little bit of code, we can make that much better. So let's go ahead and start by modifying some code in our dragger.vue component. So one thing that would be really nice is if we could hide our image until it was fully loaded. And we can do that by setting an opacity to the image by default of 0. And if you pop back over to the browser, you'll see that the image stays completely transparent forever. So let's go ahead and set up a load event, or rather a load action. So similar to how we can update the coordinates with a dispatch, we can also tell Vuex that our map has loaded with the dispatch. So we'll run store.dispatch set map loaded. And we have not created this action yet, so we're going to have to do that now. Actually, I'm going to just copy the action I have here already. Set map loaded, and this one is going to commit a map loaded mutation. And we know that it's just going to set it to true, so we don't need to pass any more data along with it. And we also need to set up our store to have a default value of false, because the map inherently starts off not loaded, and we will explicitly set it to loaded once it has loaded. So this is how it works. Our component is created. We then wait for the image to load. And once the image has loaded and we've bound pep to it, we dispatch an action that says, hey store, we have the map has loaded. Please set that property to true. And now we want to use that property on our actual component. And we can do that like so. So what we're telling Vuex here, or what we're telling the component here, is that whenever this property here becomes truthy, apply this class. And then the final step here is to create a getter that we can use in our component. So let's head on back over to our getters file, and we will create that getter. And now that we've defined this getter, we can use it throughout our components. And it looks like I have a syntax error. And it looks like I have a typo over here in our getters file. And if I inspect the map, which I know is still transparent, I will see that I have a class of has loaded. So now that we have the class has loaded applied to our component, we'll go ahead and do something with it. So let me close a few tabs here, and we'll head back over to our style here, and we'll use the has loaded class to remove the transparency that we have on the map. There you go. You don't see the map until it's set in place. And then let's add in one other UI enhancement. We'll let it ease in nicely. So that's a much better experience. It makes our app feel much more rich. But one other problem that we've now introduced by putting this transition here is that whenever we move it around, there's a artificial lag, which we don't want. So we're going to configure pep to remove that transition whenever a user interacts with the object. So we want to apply the no transition class once a user starts to interact with the object. So in a similar way in which we've configured our REST function, we can configure another function called initiate. And what we want to do in our initiate function is apply the class no transition. And just like the REST function, we're passed an event, and we're passed the pep object, and it will simply add a class of no transition. And you can see that there is no transition class added quite yet, but the moment I interact with the object, Looks like I have a typo. It's saying pep.addClass is not a function, and that's because I should have called addClass on the element, not on the pep object itself. And we'll head over to the DevTools and the Elements tab, and we'll see that the noTransition class has been added, and now we're good. So the last thing that we'll do before we end this video is create another PR and merge it in. So you can see that we've modified the package.json, the component, the main file, and then we've added some new files here as well in this source/Vuex directory. So we'll add everything and we'll commit our files. We'll say git commit, set up the Vuex store, and we'll push that up. Then we'll head over to GitHub, and we'll see that our new branch has been pushed, and we can create a pull request. And let's quickly review our changes. Okay, looks great. So I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next video, we'll actually serialize the state to the URL and deserialize the state back into the store, and that will allow our map to remember its coordinates.